Hey there, it is, oops, just making sure this is going. I'm taking a break from my glasses because they're hurting my nose. I'll have to put it back on in a minute so I can see what I'm doing. This is Moxie, and I'm addressing a question from one of the viewers. This is from SallySass.com. Sally Sass, sorry. I'm still recovering from the whole shingles thing and feeling a little under the weather, but I wanted to put a video out there just so I'm not, leaving you guys hanging for days yet again. But she was asking about whether or not I feel the depression, if people with sociopathy feel depression and anxiety, and if it's because of the fact that we feel so isolated because of our behaviors. I'm kind of paraphrasing. The self-imposed isolation due to our behaviors. Do we feel depression and anxiety? Is it safe to say? And I would have to say, first of all, I'm going to extend that beyond just sociopathy, but to the whole umbrella of antisocial personality disorders, which encompasses, sociopathy and primary and secondary psychopathy. Hold on, kitty cat. So I did address this in another video a bit, but I have no problem going back over it again. I'll get into it in a bit more depth here. Yeah, absolutely. Now, when it comes to primary psychopathy, that is a form of psychopathy considered to be a bit on the more, impossibly, because the jury is out, but it might be because it's possibly genetic. They're considered to be more on the cold-hearted side and less treatable, perhaps not even treatable at all, but people with sociopathy and secondary psychopathy are considered to be certainly treatable. And one of the reasons that the suicide rate and the rate of alcoholism and drug abuse is so high is because of the fact that we do suffer from depressions and anxiety so frequently due to the fact that we have managed to isolate ourselves due to our behaviors. Because over the years we have, kind of burned our bridges due to the fact that we've manipulated and, isolated ourselves through our behaviors. I'm kind of me no word good today. Sorry, not feeling the best today. Through the fact that we've manipulated people, we tend not to have very good long-term relationships in terms of romance. Oftentimes, we're kind of for instance, I am kind of behind most of my friends. A lot of them have gotten married. I had a child, but he passed, unfortunately. But a lot of them have got grown children, maybe even grandchildren at this point. They've been in long-term marriages, maybe even just long-term relationships, which I've never had a really long-term romantic relationship. They've had friendships that have lasted since maybe grade school or high school. I've got none of that going on. I do have a couple of long-term friendships, but the only reason they've lasted so long is because these people have made the effort, a concerted effort to maintain the friendships. I have a really hard time doing that on my own, maintaining a friendship, making the effort to reach out. And they've done it despite the fact that I've been, not the best friend a lot of the time. So even though I'm a very social person, I fall on the secondary psychopathy side of the scale as opposed to the sociopathy, although there's a lot of intersection there. I read the Venn diagram in the previous video recently about how they intersect. And then there's also the sociopathy, how that intersects with a lot of the psychopathy traits. It's all that's why it's under the ASPD umbrella. But yes, we absolutely do feel a lot of depression and anxiety due to the fact that the exact reason that you stated. And it is self-imposed, absolutely. I can go into a bit more of the drug addiction and alcoholism. One of the things that is interesting and kind of tragic about us, unfortunately, is that one of the reasons that a lot of us don't seek treatment is because instead of seeking treatment, we will instead turn to drugs and alcohol. Because guess what? It's a lot easier to bury things under drugs and alcohol than it is to actually face ourselves and face our behaviors and what we've done and the way that we live our lives, and it is to actually, to seek treatment of any kind. I kind of lost track of my sentence over there. My cat's doing something weird. I may have to let him out. Facing oneself is very difficult under any circumstances. Facing one's past and one's abusive childhood is difficult under any circumstances. But then on top of it, when we are perpetuating that abuse ourselves, when we have a cluster B personality disorder, that, you know, it's a given that we're perpetuating abusive behavior on our own, and bringing that down to other people, possibly our own children. Although, you know, most of the people that I know in my groups, which is why I'm part of the groups, is because we're all part of this collective desire to improve ourselves and not be that way. You know, many of us are ex-drug addicts, but we're all like on this road to self-improvement. We're all most of us are seeking therapies of some kind or another, and making an effort to raise our children properly and not perpetuate that cycle of abuse. But, you know, as I said, many of us are former addicts of one kind or another. I certainly am from my teenage years. After my son passed, I had a brief stint with quite a heavy drinking, period of heavy drinking. But, you know, this is all because of, you know, masking the pain of what we went through as children. But if we perpetuate that behavior, you know, the cycle just continues, because you know, if you're raising your kid while you're an addict is not a good way to go, you know, which I did not do, by the way. But a lot of people, like my mother, for instance, was an alcoholic while she was raising me, and she was a grandiose narcissist, never sought treatment of any kind. She put me through therapy, which briefly it was like a joint therapy kind of thing, which is where she got diagnosed as well. But she completely ignored the diagnosis and just, you know, focused on what was wrong with me, but never sought treatment after that, and just chose to self-medicate instead. And self-medication is a very popular thing with people with cluster B personality disorders, because then we don't have to face ourselves. We don't have to face the abuse that we went through. We can dissociate and drown all of that under a haze of alcohol or drugs. And then that's, you know, hence the suicide rate being so high as well, because, you know, depression from drug use, you know, alcohol is a depressant, drugs tend to mess with your brain chemistry, and the suicide rate from drug use is very high as well. Not seeking therapies, even if we're not doing drugs and all that sort of thing, the isolation that we experience, the lack of friendships, the burned bridges, the fact that we are, you know, sometimes, you know, a lot of this happens when we're getting older as well, you know, so the unfaced, you know, the undealt with childhood, the isolation, just the mental illness involved, all those things can accumulate, and that is a really heavy depression to be dealing with. And then, like for instance, I don't experience anxiety the way most people would consider anxiety, like the way I hear anxiety described to me. Although I do think that, you know, I experience stress, certainly, but the way I think I experience stress is more like through my hypomania, where I don't sleep for days on end, and I think my body experiences it through like my illness. I'll get flare-ups of my Ehlers-Danlos illness and my autoimmune illness. I think I feel it in my body more than I do like, oh my God, I feel like so anxious, you know, like I don't feel that sort of like fearful anxiety sort of thing. That doesn't really happen to me. But I do know that other people with ASPD also kind of have this sort of confusion about what anxiety is too. Like, oh, I don't get anxious, but I think that they manifest it in other ways too. At least that's kind of the impression I get. I know that a lot of us are like, anxiety, I don't know. But some of us do indeed like admit to like, oh yeah, anxiety, sure. And it's because of, you know, a lot of the, you know, those feelings of just kind of sick of our shit, you know, and the accumulation of just the realization of once we finally start to, especially once we start to get self-aware, we become more aware of things like that. We become aware of our depression, which is why a lot of us seek therapies eventually, because we become aware of the fact that we're just really depressed, and it becomes, you know, those of us who are a little bit more high functioning and self-aware finally get to the breaking point where we're like, we have to do something, you know, something's got to give, right? Which is why a lot of us, which is why all the people in my groups are where we are. That's why we are in these self-help kind of groups with each other, like giving each other support, talking about different therapy modalities, you know, trying to figure our shit out, you know, because it's a very difficult place to be, you know. All of us have gone through some really horrific abuse as children, which is why we have the cluster B disorders to begin with. And having to look at that stuff is really, really hard, because most of us experience some form of dissociation from our childhood abuse, so we didn't have to face it as children. And then turning around and facing it as an adult can be very, very difficult. We don't want to have to look at that stuff. Like, who would want to have to look at that? But it's part of the process. So a lot of us don't drink anymore, don't do any kind of drugs anymore. And some do, of course, but the ones that I tend to gravitate towards are the ones who are like me and don't do any sort of recreational drugs or anything like that, because it's just, we know that it's counterproductive for us and for the healing, that process that we're going through, and the therapies and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's certainly very true. And to try to get through our depression, and if we do experience like an anxiety disorder, all of us experience CPTSD, and I believe that anxiety is a part of that. I'm sure I'm experiencing some form of anxiety, because that's what CPTSD is part of it, right? I swear the cats are just in and out and in and out and in and out. Hi, Esmeralda. It should be called Psychomoxie and Cats, these videos. So the CPTSD, of course, involves an anxiety component as well. Because of long-term abuse, we have that form of CPTSD. And we have to deal with it eventually if we're not going to crash and burn at some point, And a lot of us, those of us who tend to be where we are now, which is like the point where we're like seeking help in therapy, it's because we've gotten a bit older. Hold on a second. It's because we've gotten a bit older. We know we just can't go on the way we've been in the past, In fact, just today I was in one of the chat rooms that I belong to with our group, and we were talking it gets exhausting. It gets exhausting holding up the mask. It gets exhausting doing all the former manipulations and all the mirroring techniques and all the things that we've done in the past to sort of all the shitty things that we've done. It gets tiring and it gets old, It gets really tiring and it gets old and it gets lonely. And after a while, and some of us, when we have children, things start to change. All these and maturity will change things for a lot of us too. It's just part of growing up, and many of us take much longer than most people will to grow up. Like, a lot of us don't reach maturity until we're well into our late 30s or 40s. So we are emotionally a lot more immature than most people, I would say. I don't want to speak for everybody, I hate to do that, but I think just as a general consensus from what I've noticed and what I've read in my studies, in my research and all that, I'm going to be pursuing, my former education is in psych, and I'm going back to pursue a degree in forensic psychology as soon as I get my paperwork all finished up and everything like that. I had to quit once my son got ill with his mental illness and everything, unfortunately, and then my illness kicked in, and so I had to quit school for a while. But I do have a background in this, so it's just from what I've noticed and from my daily research and everything, it seems to be we mature a lot more slowly than other people do, if we do at all, because not all of us do seek treatment. Not all of us become more self-aware. Some of us get worse. There's a lot of research that says that the people who don't seek treatment and who are much more low functioning, instead of getting better, we get worse. Maturity doesn't have anything to do with it, because we don't mature. But those of us who are I'm taking from the pool of people that I am involved with, and those of us who are more self-aware, more high functioning, a little bit more cognitively aware, perhaps a little more intelligent, we tend to get better because of that maturity and that self-awareness and the effort that we're putting in. It takes a lot of effort. If we don't have the effort, we're not going to get better, obviously. As self-aware as we may be, it takes a lot of effort and maturity. So there's that. So yeah, there's just many components involved, but what it comes down to is the fact that, as you asked, it is because of the fact that we have burned all of our bridges. We feel loneliness because of our self-imposed, isolation, because of our behaviors, and because of the fact that we become aware after a certain point that we have done this to ourselves, And so, as painful as it may be to look at that on some level, it's like we have to do that. And, that can bring on a lot of depression and anxiety, but it can also it can be the impetus for change for us as well. Because what will give you the impetus to change more than, disgust with oneself and pain at one's own actions? Like, what am I going to continue on like this, or am I going to change myself? There's this feeling of there can be redemption from this. There can be something good that comes out of it, which I can change myself, I can change my behavior, I can change my life, and there has been a lot of change. I've been on this path for quite some time now. This, like, when I had my child was when things really started to, like, kind of click in my head that there was things that needed to change. And then after he passed away is when things really started to make a difference, because I realizing that I was utterly alone in the world when it really came down to it. Like, I mean, it's not like I have literally no relationships at all. That's not true. But I think I mentioned that last video where it's like there's a sense that no one really truly knows me, which is my own fault. Like, my son knew me quite well. How could he not? But because he was my flesh and blood, and we had a very close relationship. I mean, he was the only person in the world that I truly loved, like, deeply and unconditionally, and that I ever truly felt love for, and that I know that he truly loved me unconditionally as well. So once that was gone, it was like, well, what do I do now, and how do I change things, So, and that's kind of where the impetus to really make a change came from on a deeper level, So, yeah, I mean, in order to not feel as if I was completely isolated in the world, and hopeless and helpless in the world, I realized I needed to make a really big change. And so that was 15 years ago. So I've been working on this for quite some time. I've been in therapy, and I've had, like, breaks in therapy and breaks in psychiatric care because of just insurance issues and things like that. It hasn't been like a consistent 15 years of therapy, but it has been a consistent 15 years of me seeking, working on myself and seeking help on whatever level I could get it, whether it be like self-help or education or self-help groups or actual literal therapy, and psychiatric care, taking medication, all that kind of stuff. It's been, at least something has been going on in those last 15 years. So this is not new stuff for me. I started my education back in the 90s. So, this is not all new stuff for me. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question. I'm kind of getting redundant at this point, but, and you're going to find people who are not as educated about what ASPD means, and who think that we just don't have any clue, and that we don't feel things like anxiety or depression because of, any sort of self-awareness whatsoever. But that's not true. I mean, if you do enough deep diving research to people who have been studying cluster B personality disorders, you'll find that that's true. All I have to really do is, like, go to Google Scholar and do some real research, and not look at, like, social media, internet crap, or, like, because that's not going to get you anywhere. Because those are just people who are looking at the very, very surface, and, like, looking at media hype, and they don't know what they're talking about, But there's been a lot of, there's been enough research done on us where it's, looking at the differences between the different types of, like, psychopathy, and the crossover between sociopathy and psychopathy, and the types of self-awareness that we are capable of, and which, that we are capable of getting actual help and changing. That is definitely true between sociopathy, certain, on the spectrum of sociopathy, the more self-aware, more high-functioning types, and then secondary psychopathy, we're certainly capable of that sort of change in self-awareness. Primary psychopathy, not as much, at least according to current research. So there you have it. And so that's pretty much what I have to say about it. And I know, just speaking for myself, that is certainly true, what you asked, Sally. So hopefully that answers your question. And I'm gonna end this video now because I'm still I need to get like back to bed because I'm feeling a little feverish right now, and it's really hot outside. So I am gonna get back to laying down and watching goofy things on Netflix. But I hope I answered your question, and I'll be back to see you guys really soon. And thank you again for your question, by the way. I really appreciate that. And if anyone else has any further questions to ask, please feel free to leave them down below in the comments, and I will do my best to answer. And I will talk to you guys really soon. Bye.